Patrick Stewart has a flawless head.
An iconic.
He does. He truly
skull.
does.
Like, you know,
Yes.
the NBA logo. Like, I feel like I want just a logo of Patrick Stewart's head.
We now know what like the lower curve of the Starfleet emblem is.
That's actually what it
beautiful
was.
dome
It's just
of
beautiful
Patrick
dome of
Stewart's
Patrick
head.
Stewart. Yeah,
Yes,
it's so good.
Welcome to a special bonus edition of X-Ray Vision. Extra-Ray Vision? Some fun bonus content for you during our dark week. And we're going to delve into some things that we haven't gotten to talk about on the show with super producers Chris and Saul. And I am going to give you recommendations of comic books to read if you too like those shows. And we know that you do because these are things that our readers and listeners have talked to a lot and are very excited about.
Great stuff.
So Chris, why don't you start?
Okay, yeah, I can start us off. I know a lot of people in the Discord have been asking for us to cover Star Trek, a personal love of mine. Rosie, I know you're also a big Star Trek fan.
I am a new Star Trek lover through Picard and other shows from this kind of new era of Star
Exactly,
Trek.
and that's specifically what I want to talk about, which is Picard Season 3, which is incredible. So at this point now, it's all out on Paramount Plus, a platform that surprisingly has a lot of good stuff on there.
Yeah,
actually.
it's a lot of cool
It's
choices.
kind of worth it.
Good
Got some
TMNT
Scream,
content.
got some Indiana Jones. Got some what?
Good TMNT content. Some good
Ooh,
Ninja
there we go.
Turtles.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah,
That's on there.
Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon.
The
It's
Joy.
on there. Yeah.
I will admit, I thought Picard Season 1 was decent.
I was Picard season 1 lover, but I understand it did not hit for everyone.
Yes, I thought it was fine. Very let down by Season 2. I tried to do the classic thing of how can we make this cheap? Let's go back to the present. But I will say, if they chose to do that to save money, they have more than made up for it with Season 3, where like the budget is on screen. It looks amazing. This is what I feel like we all wanted to be in the first place, which was like a true epilogue to The Next Generation. So I will admit, I am more of a Star Trek movie person than the shows. I have a lot of catching up to do on the shows.
Is that an uncommon feeling? I feel like aren't more people show people for
I
Star
think
Trek?
so. I mean, that's the classic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Most people say
Yeah.
that the shows are the best thing.
Do you like the old movies as well as the new movies?
Oh my god, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, Wrath of Khan, still one of my favorite movies of all time. When I'm feeling like exactly when I'm feeling emotionally constipated, I put it on so I can cry. It's very effective. I cry every time I watch that movie. Now multiple points, honestly.
So, if you haven't even watched a lot of Star Trek shows, you can enjoy Picard.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly. You can
yeah.
absolutely enjoy it. I think
And you can
the
cry at con.
You can cry during con. Yes, the more you know, I think the more you get out of it. My brother is a huge Next Generation fan, so I will occasionally call him up and he'll start explaining some of the extra context. But even without that really deep knowledge of that show, you can really enjoy it because the best part about it is just seeing that cast back together again. Like I think famously, the original series cast had a lot of conflict, a lot of confrontation. You always get the sense that there was a lot of friction behind the scenes. And I think the exact opposite is said of the Next Generation cast, which like consistently have been this like true family for the last like 30 plus years. And so admittedly, the writing I felt was a little bit contrived to bring them all together and to like make certain things happen, but you don't care because you're just having such a fun time going with them and just like basking in them really being a family. I mean, that's always been an element of Star Trek. It's like there's this family. And I thought this kind of did the most literal take on that. It's not really a spoiler. One of the first reveals is that Picard and Beverly Crusher have a kid now. That's a big surprise, Jack, who's fantastic all the way through. I mean, he's the most like 35-year-old, 23-year-olds that I've ever seen.
Very relevant to real life.
Yeah, giving strong CW energy there, but I'd say the acting quality is maybe a little bit better. No diss.
I love the CW.
Yes.
So yes, we know.
Yes, but he's really great, and it's so fantastic. There's all these great character moments, and it's clearly written by people who really love Star Trek, and I think that's what's been consistent through a lot of the Paramount Plus era.
I would say.
Yeah, particularly Lower Decks, again, written by people who really, really love Star Trek.
And you have people like Frakes he's involved in
Oh my
Picard.
God.
He was directing episodes, I think, from the first season.
Yeah.
So you have people who are like integral to being part of Star Trek, involved in the show kind of every level. And like you said, this is the final season.
Yeah, it's final season, it's done.
So you can watch all three. You can just jump in here if you want a Next Generation hit.
Yeah, I'm a completist. I insist on watching everything. But I'd say if you're trying to go for efficiency, if you're trying to like streamline, you could probably watch season 1. There's a few kind of critical points there that are relevant. And then I think you can more or less skip season 2.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Rosie.
I'll survive.
Exactly. And then go straight to 3.
Can I just say, so I think like one thing I think all of the things that we're going to talk about they have in common is like very clearly like a lot of love on the part of like creators and cast members going into all of this stuff. Like it's made by people who are fans of the things that they're making, and like I think regardless of whether or not you are a Star Trek person or not, like when you see that on screen, it makes you feel so much more alive, like watching it, because you feel that love.
Yeah, you feel welcomed by it.
You feel welcomed.
Yeah.
I think like that sensation of like being welcomed into a space or into a show, a book, series, whatever. Like it is part of why people fall in love with things and stay in love with them, is because like, even though fandoms can be toxic, it's like the people who are hopefully making it love the thing and they want you to love it too. It's like kind of the best kinds of salesmanship.
It's a nice era to be in because this is people making it who grew up on it.
Yeah.
And we're kind of getting that with a lot of these fandoms, or even if it's newer stuff, we got more than one kind of D&D roleplay game centric thing. The people who are making them grew up playing them.
Yeah.
So it's a very fun place to be in.
Yeah.
Any last Picard thoughts before I recommend a comment?
I will say that if for people who maybe felt like Nemesis wasn't the best closure to that story, I think this makes up for some of the things that didn't necessarily work brilliantly in that movie. And actually they take some of those moments and give it some runway to like really bring a lot of like great character moments through. So
Can I also just say, we joked about this before, but I am going to say it, which is that Patrick Stewart has a flawless head.
An iconic.
He does.
An
He
iconic
truly
skull.
does.
Like the NBA logo. Like I feel like I want just a logo of Patrick Stewart's head, and
They
it's
could
just
do it.
like a silhouette, a Patrick Stewart
Right.
silhouette.
I mean, you could have, I feel like, a Picard silhouette as the Star Trek
Right,
logo.
yeah.
It
It would be
is
so
that
good.
deeply
Yeah.
connected.
It's so
I think
good.
we now know what like the lower curve of the Starfleet emblem is.
That's
It's
actually
just
what
the
it
beautiful
was.
dome
It's just
of
beautiful
Patrick
dome of
Stewart's
Patrick.
head.
Yeah, it's so good.
Wow, love that. Good for you, Patrick Stewart. Thank you for all your service of your beautiful head. Before I go to the obvious answer, which is Star Trek comics, and there are actually there is this wildly impressive Star Trek initiative going on at IDW at the moment. If we're thinking about stories to do with bringing in legacy characters, uniting a world, kind of changing a world, like a kind of great recommendation for this one is Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh,
Go
okay,
back
yeah.
to the classics. Like I would just say DC book, we've talked about it a lot, one of the ultimate kind of multiverse stories. But if you want to read a DC comic that, similarly to Picard, has a ton of famous characters, game-changing moments, and kind of huge interactions between people that you've always wanted to see, I would say Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Great choice.
So I'm going with that one first. Second of all, so basically the current Star Trek line at IDW is being curated by these two creators called Jackson Lanzig and Colin Kelly, who people probably know from their Marvel work. It is basically the first time that there's ever been a joined Star Trek universe in comics.
That's so
So
cool.
you have multiple different crossovers. They have a big event coming up called Day of Blood. And also I was at an event at WonderCon. I saw Jackson Lanzig talking on a panel, and he was basically saying they're in touch with the people who are doing the TV shows.
Oh,
So they
really?
are having crossovers between characters from the TV shows. They are making sure that it's all in canon. They have all the support of Paramount to do it. And it is like they got covers from all kinds of rad people. Leanna Kangas, Rachel Stott, Malachi Ward, Joe Quinones. Like basically any comic book artist you like has done a cover for this line. And then Lanzig and Kelly are on most of the kind of mainline stuff, but Ramon Rosales, Christopher Cantwell, Mike Feenan, Angel Uzenta, there's a bunch of people, and it is like really ambitious. And basically, I think everyone who likes Star Trek has probably been like, why is there never like a Marvel universe but for Star Trek?
Yeah.
Because there's been Star Trek comics for a long time, but this is the first time that there's kind of been this cohesive push for a giant Star Trek universe. So if you're really loving the Paramount era of the shows, this is something to get into, and it started just with Star Trek.
So when you say it's kind of like crossing over, are you saying like between the shows itself, or is it also
So
incorporating like
it's-
the other universe, like the Mirror universe, the Kelvin universe?
So
Are they all coming together?
That is, I think, the general idea is to create this huge space where there is a Star Trek multiverse, where there are all
that's
different
incredible.
lines of story. And it starts in the comics, but as on this panel, he was talking about how they are in touch with the creators, with the showrunners and stuff to make sure that this is all in line. I believe they've even brought characters from the TV shows into the comics
That's
already.
incredible.
So I think that would obviously be, I had to always shout out my superheroes, especially because I feel like
Of course,
any
yeah.
event where the big thing people are loving about Picard, I feel like is, especially this season, all these huge characters coming back. So
Oh,
that
yeah.
to me immediately says, Crisis on Infinite Earths. But I think that Star Trek line, I was so impressed when I saw Jackson Lanzing talking about it. I was like, this is somebody who knows how to sell a story and sell a project. And it is really their baby with the editor, Heather Antos. So I'm very interested to see kind of where it goes.
Is there a good starting comic? Because like I'm now listening, I'm like, I need to go buy these comics just personally. So
my understanding is it all began with just Star Trek.
Okay.
Which was the relaunch with Jackson. But that was them taking over from a book they'd done that was year 5 that was reimagining the end of the original series. And then they were like, what happens if we just do a Star Trek book? What does that look like? And that launched from there. And then there's this big Day of Blood event, which is going to feature this ship, the USS Theseus, which they have, which is captained by Benjamin Sisko. And that's going to, so
Sisko.
If you like those, if you love Star Trek, you'll probably love, and they have characters from all eras, the way that they've managed to craft the story. So that one I think will be very beloved for the Star Trek fans.
Oh, that's awesome.
We love Quark. Deep Space Nine is my only Star Trek knowledge, and so I'm constantly.
I feel like that's the one most people. I'm a Voyager. Right. I'm a Voyager stan. So, you know.
Also, can I just say that like this is like Rosie's prescribing the comics to she's like the pharmacist, like
exactly.
prescribing the comics that ail you. It's like if you like
what Saul, tell me what your first pick is.
Rosie, our comics doctor.
Yeah,
comics
and then
doctor.
I will tell you what to read.
My first pick was The Legend of Vox Machina.
Ooh, good show.
You love this show.
I
You've
love
been
this
talking
show.
about it for so long.
I've loved the show. I love it's made by Critical Role, basically, along with it's on Amazon Prime. But it's made by Critical Role Productions, essentially, along with good animators over at Titmouse and Metapigeon. But it's basically an adult animated version of the first campaign that Critical Role put together called Vox Machina, first over at Geek and Sundry, and then in campaign 2 they obviously started their own Critical Role Productions like platform on Twitch. But I'm a huge fan of both the adult animated show and the actual like live stream and like the Critical Role show itself. Like, I think like someone told me to watch Legend of Vox Machina, which is how I got into it. And she was like, she's a very dear friend of mine, and she was like, you are gonna love this. Like, you have to watch this. It's so good. And I watched it. And I was like, man, I like cannot get enough of this because it hits every like spot for me that I think something should. Like, it's an ensemble cast. They're like, I mean, we were talking about this before. Like, there's cursing and there's swearing and there's a lot of bloodshed, but there's also just this like deep-seated like heart of gold that all of these characters
really
found family.
Found family. Yeah.
It's like these are characters who are like wounded and damaged, but like push on both despite those obstacles and because of those obstacles. It like one thing I love about stories like that, and Vox Machina is exactly like that. Is like you recognize that everybody has like is multidimensional and has all these. You might say they're as multidimensional as a D20 die. That's my pun. You might say it. But it's like
very good, very good.
But the what makes it fun is like you recognize that people like in real life are gonna have good sides and bad sides.
Yeah.
They have the flaws are also their strengths, and their strengths are also their flaws. There is nothing that is not like put to use in a sort of both compelling narrative way, but also just feels very true and real to me. And like bad things blend with good things, and it just hits so well for me.
I watched season 1 and I really loved it. I really had no knowledge of D&D or Critical Role or anything like that. And I think we got like a screener or something like that. Like, hey, let's go check these out. And it is a really fun show. It's beautifully animated. The voice cast is great. I think it's the cast.
It's the actual cast.
It's basically like they animated
the show.
Right?
And they are, and the cast are all super professional voice actors and voice directors. I mean, Ashley Johnson is from The Last of Us
Queen.
Last of Us Queen, and like. It's so good. All of the cast members are so good. Matthew Mercer, who was the Dungeon Master, you see him in like voicing all these background characters because he is
cool. I didn't know
also
that.
a pro voice actor, of course. And like, I think what's so nice to see is like also Critical Role is like a massive, like they are probably one of the biggest Twitch streamers ever and like massive in the D&D world and tabletop gaming world. But it's cool to see like them get this sort of broader exposure. I think sometimes people who play D&D, like myself included, it's like seen as this kind of like weird off to the side. I mean, even though it is massive, like justifiably massive, it's still sometimes you feel like people like really D&D, like wow. But it's cool to see them get that like Hollywood recognition that I feel like a lot of people in like digital media overall, and also like just D&D itself has like not necessarily gotten always a good treatment or like
right. It's been like the butt of the joke, I think, maybe more often than it has been like spotlight as something that's like really fun and people are really passionate about.
Yeah, and that's definitely changed. I would even say like Stranger Things was like
did
a
a lot for
huge
that.
change, and then now we have the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which I know you're going to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think Amazon weirdly has become a really incredible space for animation.
Yeah,
in a way,
so good.
I
One of the
wasn't
best shows. Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily expecting. So this is great because I have there are so many like D&D role playing comics in the world, and we've got multiples because of you two. So the first thing I'm going to recommend was this incredible project that was edited by Steens, who I think is just one of the best cartoonists and editors around, called Rolled and Told. And it was a 6-issue D&D magazine, but each magazine had comics that followed characters and used comics as a way to teach people how to run a campaign. And it is so beautiful. The art is gorgeous. The vibes were immaculate. I loved reading it, even though I've literally still never played D&D.
Same, yeah.
It is just, it's like this really cool combination of comics and tabletop gaming.
Oh, that's so
and
cool.
It is just really beautiful. The issues were so gorgeous. There were unbelievably illustrated maps for your campaign, so you get a visual world. I just think it's one of the loveliest, kind of most experimental and ambitious projects that I've seen in comics for a long time. It came out a few years ago now, but it is really, really cool. And also just go and check out Steens because they are a really brilliant cartoonist. They do Heart of the City. I've recommended it on the comic before. But yeah, that is completely delightful. And another one that I'm actually going to recommend that one of the official D&D comics in regards to yours, only because one of the pull quotes from that comic came from Matthew Mercer because he was a huge fan of the book.
Wow.
Yeah, it's this super cute, absolutely delightful middle grade graphic novel series that they're beginning. It's an official Dungeons and Dragons book called Dungeon Club Roll Call. And it's by Molly Knox Ostertag, who is somebody that probably people here are really familiar with. I believe they worked on Owl House. And Xanthe Boomer is the artist. It's just so gorgeous. And it's basically like two kids, Jess and Olivia, who are really the closest of friends. And middle school sucks and is basically like a dungeon.
Tell me
That's
about it.
kind of the thing. Yeah, right? And the way that they escape is by playing Dungeons and Dragons. And it's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
But the cool conflict comes in when Olivia kind of wants to expand who comes into the group and kind of introduce new party members. So you have this great dueling coming of age narrative about the kids who are playing the game, the characters within the game, and it's really great. Yeah, and Matthew Mercer was one of the pull quotes who just absolutely loved it. He said, "An absolutely wonderful story that exemplifies the joys, challenges, and lifelong memories forged between friends in the creative furnace of role-playing games." And he said a lot more, but he also said, "I absolutely loved it." So I always think of him because, and it's such a joy. Like when you think of a middle grade comic, this is probably exactly the kind of art you're thinking of. It's really sweet. It's gorgeous. Ostertag is already like a New York Times bestselling author, so just pure quality, and I'm a huge fan of it.
What I like about it is it seems like from what you've said is like there's not really a villain necessarily. It's like
that's
the thing is like if one
like real life
person
antagonism.
it's real life antagonism. Like one person just wants to bring in more people and include more people in the opportunity to play, which is like I like that because it's not there's no just like sometimes in like an actual D&D campaign like. Sometimes your villains have like the best reasons to do the things that they do.
Yeah,
there's
because everyone loves an empathetic villain.
Yeah.
And I think one of the coolest things about middle grade comics in general, which I'm always talking about younger reader comics, middle grade comics, one of the best things is so often they're essentially autobio, coming of age style comics where they're playing, even in a fantasy space, they're playing with that kind of nostalgic relatability of what was it like when you were a kid? They're made for a young audience, and I think that's brilliant because I love kids reading comics. But oftentimes I read like Raina Telgemeier, who's absolutely astounding, probably one of the most successful cartoonists in the world right now, who makes comics for kids. Her books like Smile and Drama and stuff, when you read them, they will immediately speak to you. There is something universal. We've all been kids.
Right.
And this very much leans into that, but it has that cool Dungeons and Dragons twist.
It also seems like right now, I know you're recommending a lot of like kind of like that middle grade stuff. It seems like it's kind of like a golden era almost
Oh,
for like that
definitely.
age range, getting such brilliant content that's like warm and relatable and has something to say, but it's also like really fun.
Yeah, it doesn't talk down to them either.
No,
That's exactly it. Yeah.
In my mind, I think it's kind of that funny fallout from Watchmen, right? In late 1980s, there's Dark Knight, there's Watchmen, and there's this idea that boom, pow, whap, comics aren't for kids, right?
Right, yeah.
Comics have always been for kids, but there has always been comics for adults too.
Right.
But the focus since that late 80s has been on these adult comics. So thanks mostly, I have to say, due to Raina, because there was multiple months where she would have like 3 or 4 books on New York Times bestseller lists, and all the publishers would start to be like, "Oh, I think we should be making these."
Like, take note.
We are now in this really brilliant era of diverse, inclusive, middle grade comic books, and also seeing big 2 comic books that are going back to that audience, while also still delivering. DC's doing a big event soon, Night Terrors. It's going to be like a scary event. So, so we're getting the best of both worlds. Also, manga being so huge right now, like outselling American comics. That is also another great space for kids to be coming into these stories.
I think anything that's like middle grade YA, like the lesson is like you're never too old to escape into a world that is, whether like it's for someone who's younger than you or not, like, and I air quotes for even though this is a visual thing, but like like it's you never grow out of the will and desire to like escape, believe, like transcend where you find yourself being, and hoping to it's either returning to a place that you've already been from a different perspective, or to arrive at a new place that you never got to go as a kid for whatever reason. Like, we all want that opportunity.
Yeah, and I personally, I mostly read YA. When it comes to like prose novels, I mostly read them because they have the most ambitious storytelling, usually the most inclusive, and wild stories about like cool disabled kids in like a fantasy world or something. Not getting a lot of that in literary fiction.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Not quite so much.
And I think this was something that Nicola Griffith talked about when she was on the pod in our episode where we were talking about alternatives to the author that shall not be named.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Which was that like a lot of, quote unquote literary novels, sometimes like they put the emphasis on the like trauma and on the like this is something to be overcome, when again, like sometimes the things that happen to us, regardless of whether they are good or bad, like it's about how you see them, and you can always a lot of YA novels, especially in the genre space, they decenter the trauma and disability, and they make it just that these are just like characters. They're just people just living life and being in the world. And I think like when you don't spend all your time focusing on like, look how terrible this person's life. It's like not trauma porn. It becomes
something totally different.
Totally different.
Yeah, we see that with queer storytelling all the time.
Exactly.
For decades. So it's like,
and
how hard is it?
fiction is the same. It's like, this terrible thing that happened to me. But
such trauma, all the stuff to overcome.
But then you get something like Heartstopper, which was a webtoon comic, by the way.
Yeah.
And that is just some delightful, loving story of like queer kids. And then suddenly it speaks to everyone on a really big level, which I will use to segue on.
Well done, Rosie.
On how that I would say that your second pick is very much in that space of bringing an inclusive, different view on something that people think is quite niche, but that's actually spoken to a lot of people in the form that it's in, including you.
Including me, yes. No, I mean, my other recommendation is the Dungeons & Dragons movie that just came out, Honor Among Thieves. Again, I don't know really anything about Dungeons & Dragons. I've never played it. I remember a little bit from Vox Machina, but I'd heard this was really fun, and I went. And yeah, it's incredibly fun. It's just, I thought we were so lucky recently between this and I'd also say Renfield, like these two movies that come from admittedly like very cynical origins, right? Like someone's trying to capitalize on IP. And it was handed to people who like really understood the material and found a way to elevate it and really speak to like what works for them. I mean, it ultimately comes down to like Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley, who did Game Night, which is really fantastic.
So much fun.
They did one of the drafts of Spider-Man Homecoming, like really talented guys. And they put together this incredible cast. Like everyone in it is so perfectly cast. They're all incredibly charming. They all have great chemistry together. And again, we're talking about like found families.
Found family.
That's the whole thing hangs on. And I have a personal love for Chris Pine.
Understandable.
Me too.
Yes.
I think we can all say that we're kind of pine nuts here.
We're 100% pine nuts. Absolutely.
He plays a lute in this, I believe, right?
Something like
he's got
that.
a great singing voice. I mean, anyone who's seen Into the Woods knows that he could actually sing. And I would say that he's usually kind of like duking out with Chris Evans for my top Chris. And
Except other than yourself.
Oh, yes, obviously.
You're the X-ray vision pick for Tops, Chris.
Exactly.
We're a lordies over here.
But he really kind of leads the whole thing, and he's so charming, and he's just kind of like aloof. And what I imagine, and maybe Saul, you can like clarify this is true or not. What it felt like when they were approaching is like, how do we bring an element of the game in there somewhere?
That is what I heard. I saw many people, including in our Discord, talking about how the film feels like even the way that it is built and the narrative that it takes is actually following a D&D campaign. So it has this meta text to it that's not just about like things like the owlbear and stuff that people want to see.
Those are just Easter eggs. This is falling almost like on a structural level. It's like that kind of like there's sort of a randomness to D&D campaigns that
and that's exactly it.
Seems to have. Yeah,
it's like the whole thing is like a series of fetch quests, which makes perfect sense. That's what I believe like a D&D campaign is.
Yeah, very often.
And what I think it does so brilliantly is it takes the weird, unexpected turn, which is what I would expect in a D&D campaign. The whole idea is like, oh, this totally unexpected thing happened. Do we go with it or not? And this kind of like ragtag group always just goes with it, right? It's like, plan A failed, we're on to plan B. Oh, plan B failed, well, we're going back to plan C, which is basically plan A. This is like all of it's kind of like on the fly, and it's just, it's surprising all the way through. Like you can always kind of expect certain story beats. You know, there's at the end of the day, like it's a film that has a structure. Yeah. But how it gets there is so unexpected along the way, and it has so many great jokes. Like, I mean, I love anything that has a little bit of humor. For me, I can't do a lot of stuff that's just like pure drama.
Yeah, same.
And this got me laughing out loud a lot through the screening. I absolutely loved it. It is just like brilliant and heartwarming and cheeky and clever, and there's some really amazing visual stuff. I won't say what specifically, but they like introduce a device that like could be really easily just like, oh, and this solves all of our problems, but they find a way to still introduce new challenges
that's fun.
along the way.
It's I think so much about like D&D. Again, it's that found family thing. It's like, and like part of D&D is like it's such a collaborative process, and it is so random because when I started playing D&D, it was like as a person who some people might say I'm a control freak. Some people might say I like having a lot of control. Not
only
talking
the benefit
about,
of this show that you produce.
Yeah,
so
not talking to you right now, my therapist, but I do think that like one of the nice things about playing D&D for the first time for me was learning to let go, because of course like these are other people who have other ideas of the places they want their characters to go, and you then have to let go and be okay with like the randomness that is life. And I arrived at D&D, just again, not to make this about me, I arrived at D&D at like a very, very challenging time in my life, and with a lot of personal difficulties, and it was such a saving grace to both play and to like watch Critical Role and to get that opportunity to like collaborate with people in like a fun way that's like very low stakes. You know, it's not, you're not thinking like, oh man, this is going to be a movie someday or whatever. I mean, maybe it will be, but like it's just a fun time with friends and people who will become your friends in the process of playing, filled with randomness, and that's just what life is, and it's nice to be able to have a way of like working out that sense of the randomness of life. I guess that makes sense. I remember one of the engineers at Crooked, I think safe to say friend of the pod, like Charlotte. Plays in the campaign at Crooked. That there's a Crooked D&D campaign that I play and Charlotte plays in, and I remember talking with them, and they talked about like sometimes what's great about D&D is like a lot of people seem to use it to like excise demons that they have, and like
sometimes literally
it happens all the time, literally and figuratively on D&D campaigns everywhere. And I think you get that chance to do things that you wouldn't do in real life, but you get to do it in a role play context, and I just think that's so much fun.
Well, I'm very happy about this one because this is one of my all-time favorite comics, and I think you guys did a great job introducing why it's so special. This is called Bone. It's by Jeff Smith.
Oh, okay.
So good.
So it's a black and white, like hundreds and hundreds of pages long, like one of the longest running indie comics of all time, just absolute masterpiece. And it's also, in my opinion, like one of the best fantasy comics of all time. And it very much lives in that on a campaign space. It follows some cousins, Phone Bone, and his two cousins, Phony Bone and Smiley Bone. Phony Bone runs a very dodgy mayoral campaign, and they have to leave their town, and then they end up on this kind of fantastical hunt through the forests. They draw a map, and they meet this beautiful young, powerful woman called Thorn. It is so wonderful. It very much lives in that high fantasy, low stakes space.
Oh, love that.
Jeff's cartooning is unbelievable. You can buy a giant tome of this thing for probably like $35.
Yeah, I have one. My friend gave it to me years ago, and I've been dying to read it, so I gotta get going.
And if you love kind of classic comedy, it also has this Marx Brothers aspect to it. These kind of different cartoons, these different personalities, each one.
So well drawn, all of it.
Yeah, it's stunning to look at, but it's also, if you're somebody who's read a lot of comics, who listens to our show, but who wants to get out of the big two world and into something a little bit different or a little bit more that's about like an auteur vision on cartooning, this is where I would go. I love Bone.
Right.
Also brilliant for kids. I know we have a lot of people who listen to the show who love recommending books to their
and
kids.
And have kids, yeah. Bone was a classic of the Scholastic book fairs of my youth. And they would have the like they'd subbed it out in like little chapters and they colorized
both versions.
it. Yeah. It's so good and you are spot on. It is I honestly had not thought about it until you just mentioned it, but it captures that like D&D spirit of like taking like classic fantasy tropes, putting them in kind of new directions. You get to see like heroes, villains that feel real to characters that I've definitely met in various D&D campaigns, but it's also just like it's so good and it's so heartwarming, and it is again.
And you can be like fighting a giant monster, but you can also be eating ale. You can be like sitting at an inn and having ale and breaking bread, and those kind of like that. It's almost like fantasy slice of life.
Yeah, and the Bone characters themselves are so imaginative and just like, and it's funny because they're like these like white little.
It's this kind of simplistic drawing style that when you see it, you think like, it's when you're a kid, you'd be like, I could do that. But the reality is like, you couldn't, because it's incredibly emotive and it's just a single line that works with negative space. Yeah, I think it's one of the best comics ever made, and I think it's perfect. If you're in a space, you love Vox Machina, you love D&D, you want more of these high fantasy stories. Maybe you've already read the Dungeons and Dragon comics. There are many of them. Bone is a great place, and it's accessible. Your library will have a copy. You can get it from a bookshop, or you can go to your local comic shop, which we always advocate, and get a copy. But yeah, I think it's just absolutely delightful.
I read Bone as a kid, right, for the Scholastic book fairs. That was always one I bought. I think I think just based purely on the strength of what we're talking about, I'm gonna go and read Bone again.
Read it and get the black and white big copy, because I imagine that as someone who like loves a book and loves the kind of art of a book, it's a really special thing to be able to have like 300 pages of comics, and a comic run for like 13 years or something.
Yeah,
so
it's incredible. It's like
we'll do a concurrent read, but you'll get through it a lot faster than I will.
You can read it at desks next to each other.
We could read to each other. We could do like a little reading out loud time. Pitch, you're live on the air.
Right.
Chris and Saul read Bone to each other and you, the people.
Everyone else in the bullpen will absolutely love that.
Yeah, put it in the comments. Put it in the comment section if you want Chris and I to read Bone to you on YouTube every week.
Like and subscribe.
That sounds much more inappropriate than it actually is.
Yeah.
So.
It's like, is it a threat? I don't know.
Honestly, it kind of is a threat coming from me. Do it. Put it in the comments. No.
Okay, so what is your final pick?
My final pick is not D&D. I wish we could keep talking about things that are D&D related, but I think it's still fantastic. Taking it in like a sci-fi direction, it's the TV show Resident Alien, which is on Sci-Fi. Now, I am not a CW person. I have not typically been a sci-fi network person, but someone like a mentor of mine basically recommended, her and her husband recommended this show to me, and I started watching it, and I could not stop watching it. Like, I binged it so quickly. It's fish out of water, small town guy, but the catch being like your main character played like beautifully by Alan Tudyk. Like, honestly, incredible performance. Like, the fact that he doesn't have an Emmy, so good.
Unbelievable. And comic book legend. He's in so many great comic book
Firefly,
movies.
Like, it's
Doom Patrol,
yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh,
and
so good in that.
Dodgeball, a comic icon. Steve the Pirate. No, but he brings this like vitality and like force to this part, but in like the most awkward way. It's like, it is like I talk about Cary Grant all the time. It's like watching like a reverse Cary Grant, because whereas Cary Grant makes awkward things look so incredibly easy and effortless and charming, Alan Tudyk does the opposite. He makes everyday, effortless, charismatic things look like the most awkward, weird crap ever, but in the most hilarious possible way. Basically, the plot is like, it's pretty simple. An alien crash lands on Earth, kills and replaces the town doctor, and then he's like requested to come like help the tiny town in Colorado, like the sheriff, solve crimes. That's sort of like the very basic premise of it, the alien's goal though is to destroy Earth. Like he is trying to his goal is to recover this machine he's looking for that will help him totally destroy all of planet Earth. Another kind of highlight of it is like there's one kid in town who's the mayor, the son of the mayor, and he is the only person in town who can see the main character, Harry Vanderspiegel, as his human name, who can see Harry Vanderspiegel as a...
Of course, Harry Vanderspiegel.
Harry Vanderspiegel. It's a perfectly legitimate name. Who can see Harry Vanderspiegel in his true form, so the kid only sees the alien. And there's so much joy in watching the stuntman, Keith, I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna butcher this name, Arbuthnot, but and Alan Tudyk in costume as they're but he's dressed in like a flannel shirt, but he looks like an alien, and it's just so much fun watching him in alien form and in human form, and it's a joyous show. I think again, one of the things that a big theme I'm realizing in a lot of the stuff I recommend and watch is that it just has a lot of heart. It's these ensemble casts, starring people who are sarcastic and full of grit and tenacity and but they all have a ton of heart and manage to barrel through regardless of these terrible circumstances in which they find themselves. The relationship in particular between Sarah Tomko's Asta and Alan Tudyk's Harry Vanderspiegel is so heartwarming, and I love it because it's not a romantic relationship. These are your male, just stereotypically male and female lead of a show, and you would normally do the moonlighting thing where eventually they must get together and there's will they, won't they? They don't do any of that. It's it's never played for that. It's about their friendship, and it's rare to see shows or movies, honestly, that tackle friendship that is, whether it's between a man and a woman or another man and another man or a woman and a woman, whoever, that are not to say neutered, but
platonic, a true platonic.
There's other kinds of connection, and that's the version they found.
And that's and what binds them together is not this, again, nothing sexual or romantic. It's just the truest form of friendship, which I think is sometimes more powerful to see on screen because we just don't see it that often.
Yeah. Well, shocking twist. This is one Resident Alien actually based on a comic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is our one project that was actually based on a comic, very X-Ray Vision specific.
Yeah.
It was published by Dark Horse. It was by Peter Hogan and Steve Parkhouse. And interestingly, so the setup is vaguely similar. But I will say the comic is very interesting because it is much more of a slice of life style storytelling. He doesn't kill the Doctor.
Oh.
If I recall correctly, he is not on a mission to kill Earth. It's more just that he lands in this place and you never see him as a human. He's always the alien, but everyone else sees him as the human. But the way it's drawn is the flannel shirt and
the opening credits
face.
To the show use, I think, art or use
so cool.
stylistics
That's
of the
great.
art where you see every opening credits is him doing a different common human thing, but completely wrong.
Yeah, of course.
But it's drawn in panel style, you see a panel, and it's a kid is asking him to blow up a balloon, and he's just I mean, this is a bad version, but pokes a pin in it and is and then laughs or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it's so it's him doing all of it wrong as in alien form. So it's interesting that the comic is like that.
The comic is really interesting because it doesn't necessarily have a lot of deep conflicts. It's quite about this alien finding his way in this small town, and he does have this mystery solving element. But yeah, very beloved cult comic, and I was incredibly surprised when I found out it was being adapted. You can get it. Dark Horse has it. It ran for a rather long time, and it's if you love the setup of Resident Alien and want to see the source material, read it. But also, if you Alan Tudyk, he's an intensive comedian. It's quite an abstract, out there
amazing.
space.
So good.
If you want something that's a little bit more chill,
yeah,
the comic does offer that kind of different aspect on the world.
And if you want more straight up slice of life vibes that get away from some of the mystery solving parts of it or some of the
it's
larger
procedural. It sounds at its core.
It's procedural and
which
sort of a
everyone
conspiracy.
knows that's the way you get a pilot.
That
That is
the only way to pitch
fundamentally.
It's procedural.
It's procedural, and there's a larger conspiracy that they dive into more. But if you want this much more, slice, it sounds like
it's really cool. It's still big sci-fi vibes, but it's great. The last comic I'm going to recommend based on the TV version of Resident Alien, which I think is it's got this real out there, abstract, fish out of water fun vibe. And it's kind of also about just living every day and trying to be a human, which I always love a story like that.
Yeah.
I there's a brilliant cartoonist called Benji Nate, who I love all of her work. She's fantastic. She has a new book out from Drawn and Quarterly called Girl Juice, which collects together comics that she's released online about a house of like 20-somethings who live together, and they are just like so funny and weird, these strips. There's like Bunny, who's like obsessed with clowns, and there's all these kind of like, there's the loving character, there's Nana, who's super introspective, there's kind of a YouTuber. But the way that Benji brings them to life, it really is this out there, like broad laugh out loud comedy. But she's also just an unbelievably talented cartoonist. She has a great horror comic called Hell Phone that I love. But Girl Juice is so good, and it gives me that kind of like, where do you find comedy in comics that isn't strip comics, which I do love strip comics, Calvin and Hobbes, etc. This is a truly hilarious comic, but it's also like nightmarishly relatable if you are of our age, of kind of like living with people who you love but who you also hate, who have this kind of like really idiosyncratic personality traits. And also Benji's just a master of the surreal, so it also has like so many, you'll be sending photos of panels to people and being like either like what the fuck or this is you. That's like, basically the two
And I think what's
sides.
so funny about that is like, I love the direction you took that prescription in, because it's not the sci-fi that is Resident Alien, but it's everything else about it. And like a lot of times like a genre is just the entry point into the exploration of being human. And that, you know, that doesn't have to be there. And because that's what Resident Alien is about. It's about like this weird guy trying to unlock for himself or themselves, I mean, whatever, like being human. And like, what does that mean to be human? And when you have no experience with that, like, you know, famously, he learns how to speak from watching Law and Order.
I got news for you, Cosette.
I've got news for you, Cosette.
Right? And it's like
useful for solving crimes.
Useful for solving crimes. But like, it sounds like the Girl Juice, which by the way, great title. Like,
I know, it's so good.
I wish I had thought of that one first, but like honestly probably wouldn't have worked as well if I thought of it. But there's something so like brilliant about like that. What does it mean to be human? And like it means to be weird and have quirks and just like randomness and oddities, and we should be celebrating those things and also recognizing like that's fucking idiosyncratic. Like that is weird, but not in a bad way. It's just like just bizarre.
It's just life.
It's just life. Yeah.
I went to go look up Girl Juice online, and I now have a bunch of pictures of children drinking orange juice. So I think I gotta be more specific.
If you're gonna, I'm sure this will be in some kind of YouTube version of the show notes. But if you Google it, search Girl Juice Benji Nate Drawn and Quarterly, and then you will find.
What's funny is it popped up immediately for me.
Oh, really?
I just by typing Girl Juice, it was the first thing that came up.
Saul's cartooning SEO is high. Your orange juice drinking SEO
I clearly need more
is
vitamin
high.
C in my
more
life.
vitamin C.
So,
what I think is funny though is a bunch of like girls drinking orange juice is really not the worst thing that could have popped up from.
No, that's
Girl
100%
Juice.
true.
agree.
Absolutely.
So like I think we should be happy that that's
lucked out.
the thing that came up.
That was the best version.
And that's all I will say about it.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here and recommending these great things. There's so much cool TV to talk about and movies and stuff, and it's impossible to cover it all. So this was very fun.
This
I
was
also
amazing.
love making recommendations based on other stuff. So if you guys have TV shows and movies and you think, oh, is there a comic like that? You can always send them to us. We have the email, xray@crooked.com. You can leave a comment here of movies that you want people to watch or movies you'd love to know what comics are about. You can also like and subscribe and see us here more on the old YouTubes.
And subscribe to Rosie's Substack,
Yes,
where she makes recommendations.
even more
It's great.
recommendations.
It's called
Yes,
Rosie
it is.
Recommends, so spoiler
Again,
alert,
we need that
lots of
alliteration.
recommendations.
We need the alliteration.
Always.
So thank you so much for joining us, and
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
have a good day.